National Educational Policy 2020 Structural Formation and Transformation of the Educational System. Introduction: Education as a strategic instrument of state capacity. Education policy is not merely a pedagogical framework but a structural instrument through which a state organizes its long-term productive capacity, technological adaptability, and geopolitical competitiveness. The National Education Policy (NEP) 2020 of India represents a systematic attempt to redesign the country's human capital formation architecture in response to technological acceleration, demographic pressure, and geopolitical competition. The policy is positioned as a transformational shift from the fragmented curriculum structures towards an integrated, flexible, multidisciplinary knowledge ecosystem. The reform seeks to align education with innovation systems, labor market dynamics, and knowledge economy imperatives. Historically, India has possessed an intellectual tradition rooted in institutions such as Nalanda, Takshashila, Vallavi, Vanaras, Kanchipuram, which offered structured interdisciplinary education in mathematics, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, governance as early as the 6th century BCE. This continuity between ancient intellectual traditions and modern reform initiatives demonstrates that educational transformation is not a new phenomenon, but a recurring structural adaptation of changing political economies. NEP 2020 represents the latest iteration The continuity between ancient intellectual traditions and modern reform initiatives demonstrate that educational transformation is not a new phenomenon but a recurring structural adaptation to changing political economies. NEP 2020 represents the latest iteration of such adaptive institutional change, aiming to modernize the education system through coordinated policy interventions. Historical evolution of the Indian education system. The Indian education system has evolved through multiple phases of institutional restructuring shaped by colonial disruption, post-independence reconstruction, and contemporary technological shifts. The British colonial period introduced modern universities such as University of Calcutta in 1857, University of Bombay, and the University of Madras, institutionalizing Western models of higher education, administration, and credential system. Post-independence India invested heavily in higher education through the establishment of the Indian Institute of Technology (the IITs) and the Indian Institute of Management (the IIMs), creating technical and managerial elites capable of contributing to national industrialization. India currently possesses one of the largest higher educational systems globally, consisting of more than 1,113 universities and over 43,796 colleges, enrolling more than 41 million students. The gross enrollment ratio (GER) of 27.3% demonstrates substantial expansion but also indicates structural gaps in university access to higher education. The scale of the education system highlights the importance of policy coherence and administrative coordination in achieving economic reform. Conceptual framework of NEP 2020. NEP 2020 is constructed around five core principles: access, equity, equality, affordability, and accountability. These principles reflect a governance oriented approach to educational reform, emphasizing measurable outcomes, institutional transparency, and integration with technological infrastructure. The policy proposes a transformation from a rigid disciplinary segmentation towards flexible multidisciplinary pathways. It recognizes that economic productivity increasingly depends on cognitive flexibility, innovative capability, and cross-domain skill acquisitions are also important. The policy therefore emphasizes integration between humanities, sciences, technology, and vocational training, creating hybrid knowledge structures rather than isolated disciplinary silos. A central structure reform within NEP 2020 is the proposed establishment of the Higher Education Commission of India (HECI), designed to replace fragmented regulatory bodies such as University Grants Commission and All India Council for Technical Education (AICTE). This reconstructing attempts to reduce regulatory overlap and improve coordination between accreditation. funding, and policy implementation institutions. Structural reforms of curricular architecture. One of the most significant structural changes introduced by NEP 2020 is the shift towards a 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 curricular framework. This framework restructures school education into foundational, preparatory, middle, and secondary stages, reflecting developmental psychology principles, cognitive progression patterns. The framework aims to integrate early childhood education with formal schooling, reducing learning discontinuities that historically weaken foundational literacy and numeracy competencies. The cultural reconstruction, the curriculum restructuring includes vocational education beginning from class 6, signaling recognition that labor market adaptability requires early exposure to technical and practical skills. This policy promotes flexibility through multiple entry and exit options in higher education programs, allowing learners to accumulate academic credits through the academic bank of credit systems. Such modularization of credentials reflect a shift from time-based educational models towards competency-based learning structures. The implication is the emergence of stackable credentials that enable lifelong learning and continuous skill upgrading consistent with knowledge economy requirements. The role of higher education in innovation and economic productivity. Higher education institutions play a critical role in national innovation ecosystems by facilitating knowledge transfer between academia, industry, and government. India has established multiple technology transfer offices and research funding bodies to enhance collaboration between universities and industrial sectors. Institutions such as the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research (CSIR), Department of Biotechnology (DBT), and Defense Research and Developmental Organization (DRDO) form part of the integrated national innovation structures. Programs such as the Atal Innovation Mission and Global Initiative of Academic Networks facilitate research partnerships, faulty exchange, and interdisciplinary collaboration. These initiatives aim to increase research productivity, improve citation metrics, and strengthen India's position in global academic rankings. The policy emphasizes the creation of National Research Foundations (NRF) to streamline funding allocation and encourage interdisciplinary research initiatives. Such centralization of research funding aims to reduce fragmentation and increase efficiency in resource utilization. The governance architecture of higher education. The governance structure of higher education in India consists of multiple regulatory institutions responsible for accreditation, curriculum standards, and quality assurance. Major governing bodies include the University Grants Commission (UGC), National Assessment and Accreditation Council (NAAC), and National Board of Accreditation (NBA), as well as the National Council for Teachers Education (NCTE). NEP 2020 seeks to rationalize this regulatory complexity through integrated oversight mechanisms that improve transparency and accountability. The proposed National Accreditation Council and independent grievances redressal mechanisms aim to increase institutional responsiveness and quality assurance reliability. Regulatory consolidation is intended to reduce bureaucratic inefficiencies and create predictable governance environments conducive to private sector participation and foreign institutional collaboration. Inclusivity and social equity in higher education. Educational access in India remains influenced by socio-economic inequalities, gender disparities, and geographic constraints. Female enrollment in higher education has increased significantly from the gross enrollment ratio rising from 9.3% in 2009 to in 2009 and 2010 to 26.3% in 2018 to 2019. Government initiatives such as the Rashtriya Uchchatar Shiksha Abhiyan (RUSA) and National Mission for Women in Science and Technology aim to improve participation of women in higher education and STEM disciplines. Policy provisions for differently able students include financial assistance programs and physical infrastructure modifications and academic support systems designed to ensure accessibility and inclusivity. The Right of Persons with Disability Act 2016 mandates physical accessibility features such as ramps, lifts, and adaptive learning structures. Such initiatives reflect recognition that human capital development requires inclusion of historically marginalized populations in the knowledge production system. Financial architecture of NEP 2020. The estimated financial allocation for NEP 2020 is approximately 99,300 crore, with funding contributions from central and state governments as well as private sector entities. The policy recommends increasing public expenditure on education approximately 6% of GDP, reflecting international benchmarks for knowledge-driven economies. Financial commitments are required to support infrastructure modernization, teacher training, digital learning platforms, and research funding institutions. Without sustained investment and structural reforms risks maintaining symbolic rather than optional. The involvement of private sector funding introduces both opportunities and governance risks, particularly in maintaining educational equality and preventing excessive commercialization of higher education. Implementation strategy as change management. Implementation of NEP 2020 requires institutional change management strategies capable of addressing structural inertia, faculty resistance, and infrastructure limitations. Educational institutions are expected to develop implementation commitments, curriculum redesign frameworks, and technology integration strategies. Digital learning infrastructure, faculty training programs, and collaborative governance structures are necessary components of successful implementation. Institutions must develop operational roadmaps aligning curriculum changes with administrative capabilities. Change management works emphasize stakeholders' engagement and phased implementation timelines and continuous evaluation mechanisms. Challenges in policy execution. Implementation challenges include infrastructure gaps, digital divide constraints, teacher training deficiencies, and socio-economic inequalities affecting educational access. Rural connectivity limitations and institutional capacity disparities create uneven adoption rates across regions. Technological infrastructure expansion requires significant capital management, particularly in remote areas lacking internet connectivity. Faculty training programs must address digital pedagogy competencies and interdisciplinary curriculum delivery skills. Policy effectiveness depends on coordinated efforts by the central and state governments as well as by the educational institutions and industry stakeholders. Limitations of NEP 2020. NEP 2020 faces limitations related to resource allocation, uncertainties, monitoring mechanisms, and technological accessibility disparities. The absence of robust performance measurement frameworks may hinder evaluation of policy effectiveness. Financial constraints may limit implementation of infrastructure modernization initiatives. Ensuring equitable access to digital education platforms remains a persistent structural change. Policy success depends on sustained political commitment and long-term financial investment. Conclusion. Education policy as an instrument of national transformation. NEP 2020 represents an ambitious attempt to redesign India's education system to align with global knowledge economics. The policy emphasizes multidisciplinary learning, technological integration, institutional autonomy, and research productivity enhancements. The transformation envisioned by NEP 2020 requires coordinated governance mechanisms, sustained funding commitments, and institutional adaptability. The policy seeks to create an educational system capable of producing skilled human capital, innovative research output, and global competitive institutions. If effectively implemented, NEP 2020 may contribute to strengthening India's position as a knowledge-driven economy and enhance its long-term technological sovereignty. The policy represents a strategic attempt to convert demographic scale into intellectual capital, transforming education into a primary driver of economic and social development.